As you kind of find your seat, I want you to turn to your neighbor and in your best offended voice possible say, "Don't judge me." You guys are a little too good at that. Yeah, that's scary. So we are nearing the end of our series called Misquoted, where every week we're looking at a Bible verse that most people get wrong most of the time. And I got to pick out which misquoted verse I got to preach on, and I chose this one. And I'm very excited to talk about when Jesus says, "Do not judge." What did he mean by that? And one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk about this Bible verse today is because it's so important for us to be able to respond to this misquoted verse. Because today in our culture, the idea is super widespread that if you love me, you will approve of everything I do. That if you love me, you will approve, put your stamp of approval on every single thing I want, everything I want to do. And to reject something, to say that's wrong, is to reject me. And because that's kind of our cultural mindset in America right now, many non-Christians jump at this verse and say, "Oh, Jesus said, don't judge. You should never disapprove of something that someone wants to do." Now, again, I think that's a wrong understanding, but I'm so excited to talk about this because it's such a common, widespread misunderstanding, and it's important for us to be able to know how to respond to that. And so today, as we work through this, I'm going to try and give you some ways to respond when someone misquotes this. What do you say? How do you respond to them? How can you correct that? So I'm going to give you some thoughts on how to get that conversation going. So the question is, what's wrong with this understanding of do not judge? Jesus did say do not judge. So let's just start with the fact of what most people mean when they say that. When most people say, "Hey, don't judge me," don't judge them, we shouldn't judge. Jesus said not to judge. What do they mean? If you kind of analyze what they're saying and read into it, they're saying you shouldn't evaluate right and wrong and apply that standard to others. Right? That's what they're saying. You shouldn't call something wrong and apply that standard, what's right and wrong, to other people. You shouldn't do that. Jesus said don't judge, so don't do that. And what's so funny is, as I've thought about this, is if that was correct, then you could never actually say, "Don't judge me," because you would be guilty of judging by doing that. Let me kind of work this out. When someone says, "Don't judge me," what are they doing? They're judging according to this definition, right? They're evaluating right and wrong, and they're saying it's wrong to judge people, and they're saying, "You're doing that. Don't do it." And I think we can trust that Jesus didn't give us a direct contradiction when he said, "Do not judge others." And so I just think talking about how the fact that this is kind of a self-defeating statement if you take it the way most people take it. And so I think that shows us there's something wrong with this understanding of this verse. So what did Jesus really mean? So one more time, I want you to turn to your neighbor and show off how smart you are by saying, "Don't judge me for judging you." Very good. All right, so we're in Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. It comes up twice in the Gospels where Jesus says, "Do not judge." One is in Matthew 7, and one is in Luke chapter 6. We're going to be looking at Luke chapter 6 today. Luke chapter 6, verse 37. Again, it's very clear. Jesus says, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged." Now, let's talk about the word judgment for a minute. Because judgment can mean so many different things. Both in Greek and in English, it has a very, very big range of meanings. It can mean anything from evaluate or discern to pass sentence on someone, give them a punishment. So just think about the way we use this word in English, because again, it's very similar to the Greek. You can judge a cooking contest, and you can judge a person who's on trial. In one case, you evaluate and determine that the chocolate pie tastes better than anything else. And in another case, someone's condemned to death. We use the same word for both of those things. And the question is, out of this big range of meanings, what did Jesus mean when he said, "Do not judge"? Well, thankfully and very helpfully, Jesus immediately clarified which one of those meanings he was talking about. He says, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned." Jesus is clarifying. I'm not talking about just any kind of judgment, evaluation, or discernment. I'm talking about the kind of judgment that's condemning people. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Let's just talk a little bit about what this means then. So Jesus is not saying, don't evaluate right and wrong, don't speak truth about issues. He's saying, don't condemn people. So what does that mean? Well, think of it this way. To condemn someone means to pass judgment on them in one of the two areas where only God should pass judgment on people. And that relates to a person's inherent worth, their inherent value as a human, and their ultimate destiny. That's what Jesus means when he says don't condemn. Don't judge people in those two respects. So, it's okay to say, this is right, this is wrong, you shouldn't do what's wrong, hey, I think you're doing something wrong. That's not what Jesus is talking about. But he is talking about when someone does something wrong and you say, you are worth less because you did that, or you're worthy of hell because you're guilty of doing that. When you devalue a person's worth, their dignity as a human being, or when you pass sentence on them as far as their ultimate destiny, where you think they're headed, that is judging in the condemning way that Jesus is talking about. He's saying, don't do that. Don't condemn a person. Don't devalue their worth as a human being. And don't pass sentence. Don't proclaim where they're ultimately headed. So does that make sense? You guys understand? So Jesus is not saying, don't talk about right and wrong. He is saying, don't condemn people. And if you want kind of proof or confirmation of this, it comes out even in the same passage. Just look down a few verses. Luke chapter 6, verses 41. Jesus says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Now think about what Jesus is assuming here. In this example, he's saying, like the speck of something in your eye is like something that's wrong. So there is right and wrong. And it's bad to have stuff in your eye. Like our culture wants to say today, there is no speck. I mean, that's really what our culture is trying to communicate to us today. There is no right and wrong. People can do whatever they want. When you think there's something right and wrong, that's just your version. But, what you think is a speck of sawdust in someone's eye, I don't think that's a speck of sawdust. So don't hold me to your standard, right? That's kind of what our culture says. But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, no, if there is a speck in someone's eye, that's true. And you should try and get that out of their eye. But listen to what he says next. Verse 42. How can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Right? So Jesus is saying, whenever you're going to correct someone, point out right and wrong, that they're getting something wrong, always check yourself first. We have this very strong tendency as humans to see other people's faults. It's way bigger than our own. But notice what he says. After you check yourself, after you look in the mirror, then you should correct the other person, right? After you take the plank out of your eye, you will see clearly to take the speck out of your eye. Right? It's okay to say, this is right, this is wrong. It's okay to say, look, it looks like you're doing something wrong. And it's okay to say, hey, let me help you, let me correct that. And none of that is judging in the sense that Jesus says, don't judge, right? When Jesus says don't judge, he does not mean don't speak truth about right and wrong. It means don't condemn people. So, how do you respond when someone gets this wrong, when someone misquotes this? I'm going to give you three different ideas, ways to respond. These are just kind of silly starting points, but hopefully they get your brain working and give you a tool to use. And they're kind of in order of more sarcastic to more serious. So only use the first one if you have a good relationship with the person. Okay? Judge me for judging them. But I do think that humor is very powerful and can often kind of bring things to the surface or help people stop in their tracks and think about something. So if you're talking about an issue and you're like, I think the Bible is very clear about this issue and that it teaches that we shouldn't do this. And they're like, yeah, but the Bible also says don't judge, so we should judge those people. Say, well, then you should judge me for judging them. And just let them kind of stop and say, oh. So next one is a little more serious. Question form, are you really saying that we shouldn't evaluate right and wrong? When people say we shouldn't judge in the way that most people mean that, in essence what they're saying is you shouldn't evaluate right and wrong and hold people to that standard. But the silly thing is, on a practical level, I don't know anyone who actually thinks that. Most people think there are some things that are just wrong that you shouldn't do and that we should hold others to that standard. Most people think abuse is wrong and we should stand up for that, right? So you can kind of say, hey, are you really saying that we shouldn't evaluate right and wrong? Are you really saying that abuse is okay for some people but not for others? I think abuse is wrong for everyone. We should stand up for that. And then the last one. It's always helpful to affirm people if we can. So start by saying, you're right. Jesus did say not to condemn people. But I'm not trying to condemn a person. I'm trying to speak truth about an issue. And that can just help someone start to separate out, condemnation applies to people, not about issues. I'm not trying to condemn a person, I'm trying to speak truth about an issue. So I hope that's helpful to you. Just some basic starting points of ways to respond when people misquote this, because it gets tossed around there all the time in our culture. So when I was planning for this message, I was super excited for this first bit, and just how misunderstood this verse is, how wrongly it's applied in general. And I didn't really think past that. I just kept thinking through, people get it wrong in this way too, and I could talk about this way that we get it wrong. Maybe here's another way we could correct it. And I was really challenged this last week as I was working through the passage with the simple truth of, yes, don't judge doesn't mean what most people think it means, but it does mean something. And I shouldn't just assume that I'm getting this right. Especially when this is the context where Jesus says, take that plank out of your own eye before you turn to others. And so what I want us to do in the rest of the time, now that we've said, okay, that's the wrong understanding of it, let's look at the right understanding of it and look at ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, are we getting this wrong in some ways? And if we are, let's repent of that together and change our ways. And one of the reasons this came up and I realized we needed to kind of focus on this is because of this really weird verse that is in the middle of this section. Luke 6:40 says this, the student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. I've always looked at this verse kind of in isolation as a really cool verse about discipleship. What it means to be a follower of Jesus and how that relationship works. Because basically what Jesus is saying is, no matter how good of a follower you are, you'll never be above me. I'm still your Lord. Makes sense? And he's also saying something really amazing. He's saying, as disciples, as followers of Jesus, our goal should be to become more and more like him. And we can do that through his power. We can become more and more like Jesus. Everyone who's fully trained will be like their teacher. He's saying to his disciples, you can be like me if you keep training and practicing and working with my power and letting me help you. But as I was reading this passage, I was like, that's great. What is it doing here? Like, it would make sense if Jesus said this when he first called his disciples, or in another place where he was talking to them about what it means to be a disciple. But it's literally just thrown in here in the middle of talking about don't judge, don't condemn. Everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, not the plank in your own eye? And I realized why this is here is because what it means to be like Jesus more than anything else is to be the kind of person who's loving and forgiving and full of grace towards others. I think that's why this is here. He's saying, following me is about becoming more and more like me. And what am I like? More than anything, my character is about forgiveness and grace and love and compassion for others and not condemning them. We just think about the cross, the central act of Jesus' life. The resurrection, maybe. Cross and resurrection. Right? The cross is where Jesus looked at the whole world, at every single person who has lived and will live, and said, I value you. I want to give my life for you, even though right now you're my enemy. If that's what Jesus is like, and that's who we're supposed to become like, then it makes sense that this is here. So Jesus says you can be like me, and you can even be like me in this way, of having a heart of compassion and love and grace towards others. And so the question is, as we kind of use the Bible as a mirror and look at ourselves, is how are we doing at that? Individually and as a church. So I've got some bad news and then some good news. A few years ago, the Barna Group came out with some research. They published a book called Unchristian. I'm just going to share with you just one statistic. The book is full of mostly depressing statistics. But just one of those is they interviewed young adults who are not Christians, don't self-identify as Christians in any way, young outsiders. They said, what do you think of when you think of Christians? And one of the first 3 words they came up with was judgmental. 87% of young adult non-Christians, when they think of Christians, they say they're judgmental. 87%. Think of it this way. If this week you met 10 young adult non-Christians just going around Elizabeth, you're at Safeway or Walmart filling up gas, you meet someone who's a young adult who's not a Christian. Out of 9 out of 10 of those conversations, if that person finds out you're a Christian, they're going to think of you as judgmental. And that's crazy. And maybe part of the issue here, why that's so high, is this wrong understanding of what it means to be judgmental, right? Like, if they mean by that, Christians believe in right and wrong, well then, yes, we should all be judgmental. But it's clear from the rest of the study that for the most part, they understood that they meant by judgmental condemning. So maybe the number's a little lower, but honestly, even if it's 50% or 40%, 40% of young adult non-Christians think of us as condemning, then we're missing it big time. So something we're doing is not connecting. We don't look like Jesus in this way. And so how do we fix that? How do we correct that? Well, that's where the good news of the study comes in. It's not just depressing, sad statistics. In this study, they also looked at the positive side and said there are some cases where non-Christians have said, I have a Christian friend who speaks the truth to me, and it doesn't feel like judgment. I have a Christian friend who will say, hey, this in your life, I don't think that's what God would have you do. I don't think that's right. And I don't view that as judgmental as a non-Christian. And I said, wow, that's fascinating. What does that look like? Like, how does that happen? And basically, we analyze the data and look at what these non-Christians are saying about when people speak the truth in a non-judging way. It looks like this. When Christians speak the truth humbly and in the context of a genuine relationship. So you have a genuine relationship with someone, and then you speak the truth in a humble, not kind of just arrogant, well, the Bible says that's wrong, so you shouldn't do it. But in a humble way of, I just think as a Christian, I go to what Jesus says, and he says this about this, and it seems to me that means this is wrong. So we speak the truth in a humble way in the context of a relationship. So what do I mean by that? Let me give some examples to kind of flesh this out. What this means on a practical level is if, for example, you really want to impact the issue of homosexuality, for example. You want to stand up for that, the truth of what the Bible teaches about that. If you really want to do that effectively, and not just distance people, then the best way to do that is to form a friendship with someone who's gay and become their friend for real. And then in the context of that relationship, to speak the truth in a humble way to them. And when I realized what that means, it looks like, I thought, man, It's so much easier to just copy and paste an article to my Facebook page than to do that. But I don't see Jesus copying and pasting articles. Well, I don't have this, but you know what I mean? Jesus consistently, that's what he did, right? Jesus was often accused of committing sin because he was so often hanging out with all the sinners. He never did sin. Jesus was super big on truth, but he was also super big on love and grace. And somehow he held those together. And what it looked like for him to hold those together was to form friendships with people with whom he disagreed of their lifestyle. And that's hard for us. Let's just admit that. We're not very good at this. It feels safe to be distant. But if you want to make change and impact a person, then this is what it looks like. You engage in genuine relationship with them and speak the truth in love face to face. Someone last service, afterwards we were talking, and I think I wasn't totally clear about something that I want to be really clear about right now. 1 Corinthians 5:12 is really important for this conversation. 1 Corinthians 5:12, Paul writes there, "What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside." What Paul is saying is, in essence, a group application of what Jesus said. Remember, Jesus said, don't look at the speck of sawdust in their eye before you deal with the plank in your own eye. And it's like Paul is just applying that as a group to the church, saying, hey, church, you need to deal with the plank in your own eye as a community. Stop judging those outside the church. Start with judging those inside the church. So someone last service, I think I almost made it sound like all the time, always kind of be careful about speaking the truth. Only do that if you have this really close relationship with someone. That's all true for someone who's not a Christian. If someone is a Christian brother or sister, then we are called as Christians to call each other out on if we're getting something wrong. It says it is our business to judge those inside the church. In fact, the New Testament kind of paints this picture of that's one of the main ways we become more Christ-like. That's one of the ways God wants to work on us, is through each other, saying, hey, you know what, you just did this. And I don't think you see this, but it seemed to me that was motivated by pride. And we need to be careful about pride. It's when we speak the truth in love to each other as Christians that sin is revealed to us, and we can grow past that. And so I think we've almost gotten 1 Corinthians 5:12 totally backwards. We're often very hesitant to call out sin that we see in other Christians. And very, very quick to say, those people out there, they're so bad. And the Bible tells us to do the total opposite of that. We need to start with ourselves, the plank in our own eye, to call each other out, speak the truth in love to each other first. Right? So I'm not at all saying, hey, let's be soft on the truth. Don't talk truth about issues. We need to talk more truth about issues when it comes to talking truth about issues with each other. But if someone's not a Christian, they're not yet a follower of Jesus, then the most important thing about them is not the sin in their life. The most important thing that you need to address is the fact that Jesus is in their life. And so it doesn't really make any sense to spend all your time being like, hey, you need to work on this issue and this issue and this issue. The biggest issue for them is that they need to be shown Christ and to be led towards Him. And again, that happens best through relationship, face to face. So it starts with us. So I've been humbled as I've looked at this passage and realized it has, I think, a lot to say to us. I don't get this perfectly. I think I don't speak the truth in love as much as I should to my Christian brothers and sisters. And I don't engage in a relationship like I should with those outside the church. And so I was thinking about, because in some ways this whole being condemning towards others, it's kind of this outward result of something wrong in our hearts. And as I was thinking about it this week, I was just thinking, what's the heart issue behind this? What's something we could do that would maybe just weed this condemnation out from the start and help us there? And I just kept going back to the cross. Cross. Because again, where is it God's place to judge and not our place? It's with a person's inherent worth or value as a human, and it's with their ultimate destiny. That's where God should judge and not us. And when you look at the cross, it's pretty clear what God's will is for both of us. Because again, at the cross is where Jesus said, every single person, even with all the stuff they've done, is someone I want to give my life for. That means every single person in the world has intrinsic value and worth because of that. And it also reveals God's heart for them, right? That he wants to save them. Now, some people are going to resist that work and reject him, but God's heart for all people is that they would be saved. That's why he went to the cross. And so I just think if we keep going back to the cross and keep that at the center and let the cross imprint our hearts and help us see the world like God sees the world, I think this wouldn't be as much of an issue. Because every person would say, oh man, that is someone that Jesus gave his life for. He values that person that much. I should treat him that way. So we're going to sing a song for a response time. Sweetly Broken. It's just a song about looking at the cross and asking God to break us from looking at the cross. And so my encouragement to you is to let that happen. To be reminded of what the cross means. What the cross means about God's love for every person. About God's heart for every person. And I just want to encourage you. If you have just a sense of, man, I think I've been getting this wrong in some ways, just use this time to ask God for forgiveness. Say, God, I want to change. Help me to change. Help me to root out this condemnation that's in me. And to come to him again and just say thank you for the cross. Let's pray. God, we do thank you for the cross. We thank you for what it means that you care for each and every one of us. God, there is no room for condemnation at the foot of your cross. God, strip that from us, from our hearts. Help us to see the world and people in this world like you see them. With a heart of love and compassion. And out of that love and compassion, God, push us forward to engage with people, face-to-face relationships, and genuine conversations, and genuine love where we can reach out to them and speak the truth in a loving and humble way where they can hear it. God, help us to be people marked by the cross above all else. Amen. Finally, before we sing, as we respond, if you've never accepted what the cross means, it's very simple just to say, God, I accept your gift of life that you give through the cross. And I'd love to talk with you, pray with you about what that means. You can come up and talk to me right now. We can pray together, or you can talk to me after the service. But I just encourage you to accept what the cross means, or what it means about God's heart for you. So you are welcome to stand for this time of response. You're welcome to remain seated. You're welcome to kneel. Whatever matches what God is doing in you.